Hello friends, my name is JJ and this is my new haircut. So we humans are very powerful and vain, but we are also very neurotic, with one of our most persistent insecurities being a nagging fear that someone, somewhere in this big universe of ours might not be aware that we even exist. Therefore, from practically the moment we first gained an ability to send messages into outer space, we have been preoccupied with sending one very particular message to worlds beyond our own. We are here. You could say that the first concrete efforts we humans made to inform the rest of the universe of our existence came in July of 1969. That was, of course, when Neil Armstrong and the rest of his Apollo 11 buddies made mankind's first ever trip to the moon, where they left more than just footprints behind. Alongside the bags of puke and excrement that they had to discard to make their ship lighter, 2 special commemorative plaques were placed on the moon's surface so that other space beings might someday learn what had gone down that famous summer. The first plaque was strategically installed on this leg of their craft's landing gear, since that was a part of the ship that they would be leaving behind for weight reasons. It has a picture of the 2 hemispheres of the Earth and this statement.
Here, man from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon. July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind.
And then we have the signatures of the 3 astronauts, plus Richard Nixon, who was president of the United States at that time. Nixon had wanted them to work in some mention of God in there, but this was ignored. The plaque was the work of a special NASA body known as the Committee on Symbolic Activities for the First Lunar Landing, which consisted of various NASA big shots who consulted with various elite American institutions to determine how to best commemorate this symbolic achievement. As you saw from the way that the first plaque is written, the committee people were primarily preoccupied with the idea of commemorating the moon landing as a sort of political accomplishment for Earthlings, and specifically American Earthlings, and less interested in offering much useful information about Earth itself to anyone from another planet who might someday read the plaque after learning English. The only real thing that might be interesting to an alien is the map of the Earth, and even this was intended more as a political image than an educational one. What you were supposed to appreciate was how there was no international borders on the map, thus symbolizing the brotherhood of man and all that. Now, the second plaque was similar, but was specifically designed to at least partially offset complaints that the first plaque was too America-centric. It was quite a bit smaller, however, only about as big as this bottle cap, again for weight reasons. Yet, in contrast to the first plaque, which contained a measly 22 self-indulgent American words, the second plaque had over 6,000 words from 73 countries, shrunk down to a microscopic size and engraved on a thin disc of silicon. According to a 2008 book on the history of the disc, the NASA committee had only decided at the last minute that they needed some international content on the moon. So with only a month to go before launch day, they sent letters to all of the different countries of the world asking if their leader would like to contribute a message. 73 heads of state replied, basically just US allies, and they are accordingly the ones whose poetic messages and humble brags, as one writer put it, have made it to the moon. And that is a pretty good summary of their contents, because much like the American plaque, most of the world leader statements are clearly written by and for Earthling consumption, and don't seem much interested in trying to communicate anything that would be particularly useful to a being who didn't already know or care a lot about Earth culture and politics. Here's a typical one from the president of Peru.
The government and the people of Peru join in spirits the astronauts of Apollo 11 in their extraordinary trip to the moon and express their fervent wish that the immense possibilities of the human spirit which have conquered space may be equally capable of ensuring among the nations of the Earth an era of peace and justice.
And it's basically just that sort of thing over and over, as written by the various tyrants and war criminals who were running the world in 1969, including Ferdinand Marcos, the Shah of Iran, Nicolae Ceausescu, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau. I'm just kidding. Though I will note that even on the moon, Canada's government still felt the need to write their greeting in both official languages. Launched in 1972 and 1973, the probes Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 were a dramatic escalation in man's exploration of outer space. They were the first devices made to leave our solar system, a fact that greatly excited two men in particular, Frank Drake and the fabulous Carl Sagan, both of whom were leading professors of astronomy at Cornell University. Both of these scientists were really into the idea that there might be intelligent life somewhere else in the universe, and didn't want an opportunity like the Pioneer probes to go to waste. As they would later write in a report for NASA,
"It seemed to us appropriate that this spacecraft, the first material object of mankind to leave the solar system, should carry some indication of the locale, epoch, and nature of its builders. We do not know if this message will ever be found or decoded, but its inclusion on the spacecraft seems to us a hopeful symbol of a vigorous civilization on Earth."
So they convinced NASA to install a small gold-coated aluminium plate, about this big, on the exterior of the two Pioneer probes. The plaque would contain a bunch of visual representations of information that the two astronomers believed was key to understanding the nature of our planet, including a diagram of a hydrogen atom, abstract maps representing the known universe and Earth's place in it, a drawing of the Pioneer probe itself, and a sketch of a naked man and woman as drawn by Carl Sagan's second wife, Linda. The Pioneer probes were big news at the time, and the plaques proved to be a lightning rod of controversy. One complaint was that since we didn't know what sort of alien life was out there, maybe it wasn't the best idea to just blindly send out the Earth's precise location coordinates, basically the interstellar equivalent of not giving your home address to strangers. Likewise, while the Pioneer plaques were obviously more sophisticated than the moon plaques in terms of conceding the need to communicate with the universe in something other than an Earth language, critics were skeptical that the wordless approach was really that much better. Most Earthlings can probably barely understand what's being expressed here, making the learning curve for aliens who might read or see or think in some completely different way than humans incredibly steep. But the most famous controversy of all was the nudity. America in the early 1970s was still a pretty socially conservative place, where even naked bodies in medical textbooks were often seen as unnecessarily titillating. So the fact that a respectable elite institution like NASA was putting pictures of naked people on their spacecraft, and for such a seemingly far-fetched reason, is said to have struck a lot of Americans as either hilarious, bizarre, or offensive, and the media coverage of the time really focused on this angle. For a typical response, check out this letter to the editor, published after the Los Angeles Times printed an illustration of the plaque on their February 25th, 1972 front page.
"I must say I was shocked by the blatant display of both male and female sex organs on the front page of the Times. Isn't it enough that we must tolerate the bombardment of pornography through the media of film and smut magazines? Isn't it bad enough that our own space agency officials have found it necessary to spread this filth even beyond our own solar system?"
For their part, even Sagan and Drake weren't overly proud of their work, which, much like the moon disk, was also a bit of a last-minute rush job. In their final report to NASA, they conceded,
"It is nevertheless clear that the message can be improved upon, and we hope that future spacecraft launched beyond the solar system will carry such improved messages."
Prophetic words indeed, as we shall see. In 1974, the US government funded the creation of the world's most powerful radio transmitter, located at the famous Arecibo Observatory in Arecibo, Puerto Rico. And on November 16th of that year, the observatory chose to make their first ever broadcast a message of Earth's existence to the remote M13 star cluster, where there are lots of stars and planets and things. Once again, the responsibility for the substance of the message was delegated to the two Cornell boys, with Frank Drake doing most of the work and Carl Sagan playing more of an advisory role. The broadcast they came up with is about 3 minutes long, and I will just play you a quick excerpt. You can just ignore the sounds of the scientists yucking it up in the background. So, as you heard, the message was not broadcast in any human language, but rather a simple form of Morse code made up of on and off signals. Dr. Drake hoped that the aliens would record the pattern of the on and offs and conclude, and this part is the real stretch, that since the 3-minute message contained exactly 1,679 bits of data, the pattern of the signals should be written down in a rectangular grid that consisted of 1,679 units, 23 segments wide, and 73 segments tall. And if you do all of that, you create something that looks like this. If you can get beyond the Atari-style graphics, which we have to remember would have been considered normal for computers in those days, the image is quite conceptually similar to the Pioneer plaques. You can see that there's a little human over here, and this is supposed to be a drawing of the Arecibo Observatory itself. This part here is supposed to be a map of our solar system with the sun and the Earth, and then all of this stuff is supposed to be the formula for human DNA, complete with a double helix. This broadcast faced basically all of the same criticisms as the Pioneer plaques. Too complicated, too science geeky, too irresponsible, but it did help consolidate the status of Drake and Sagan as America's leading experts of this sort of thing, and 3 years later, they would achieve their magnum opus. In 1977, NASA sent 2 more probes into interstellar orbit, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, blasting off in different directions than the 2 Pioneers. To this day, these are the 2 man-made objects that have traveled the furthest from the Earth. Once again, it was agreed that the probes should contain information about Earth on them for the benefit of any aliens who might one day find them. And once again, NASA recruited Sagan and Drake. By this point, the 2 men were firmly committed to learning from their past mistakes and making the most sophisticated possible message for the aliens using the most sophisticated information storage technology of the late 70s, a record. So, the Voyager records are probably the most complex educational thing we have ever sent into space, and were the product of a month-long project involving not just Sagan and Drake, but dozens of other people from Cornell and NASA and various other elite institutions. The records wound up being made of gold-plated metal, so they would last forever. And just like a normal record, they contained a bunch of music and sound recordings. In this case, stuff that was supposed to provide some indication of what life on Earth was like. On the B side of the records, meanwhile, there were a bunch of pictures of stuff coded into audio data, which is honestly not something I was aware you could even do with records. Even after reading a lot about this, I still don't really understand how it works, but it does. And there's a guy on YouTube who tried his hand at decoding the pictures from the audio data back in 2017 using only the hieroglyphic instructions engraved on the covers of the records themselves, and you can see he managed to pull it off. Between the sounds and the pictures, there is a ton of content on these records, and I don't have time to summarize it all. But basically, as the author of this great book on the history of the records puts it, the goal was to show humanity on a good day. So there was nothing about war, nothing about suffering or oppression, just generally upbeat, generic stuff that painted Earth in a flattering, intriguing light. The 116 encoded images, accordingly, are mostly just a lot of stock footage type photos of humans doing random human things, as well as a couple of shots of animals, nature, and buildings, plus a few diagrams of human anatomy and some basic scientific concepts. The audio side is quite a bit weirder, however, and a pretty thorough examination of the full spectrum of what sound can be. So there are 27 different pieces of music from different cultures, clips of all sorts of random earth noises like dogs barking, footsteps, laughter, volcanoes erupting, and so on, and a long montage of people speaking different languages. That last part is kind of amusing just because it was a bit of a dog's breakfast, logistically speaking. It begins with a short greeting from Kurt Waldheim, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations at the time.
As the Secretary General of the United Nations, an organization of 147 member states who represent almost all of the human inhabitants of the planet Earth, I send greetings on behalf of the people of our planet.
Waldheim had sent this recording to the organizers completely unsolicited, but they were too polite to turn it down, so in it went. There was originally supposed to be a recording from then US President Jimmy Carter as well, but Carter was weirdly self-conscious about his southern accent and didn't want aliens to think that that was how English-speaking people talked, so he didn't wind up participating. Instead, Waldheim's words are followed by little snippets of speeches from the various members of the UN Outer Space Committee, interspliced with whale noises.
I should like to extend the greetings of the government and the people of Canada to the extraterrestrial inhabitants of outer space.
I wish to extend greetings and friendly wishes to all who may encounter this Voyager and receive this message.
Unlike Waldheim, the organizers actually did always intend to include these people, but after recording them, they found that they rambled too much, so making them part of a whale sounds montage was considered a polite way to trim them down. The UN Space Committee also proved to be less multicultural than they expected. So to fill the various gaps, the record organizers just went back to Cornell and got some international students to record a few simple greetings in their native languages.
Ashuli. Namaskar. Bishe Shanti Hok. Salvete quicumque estis. Bonam erga vos voluntatem habemus, et pacem per astra ferimus. Shalom.
And that was that. The two Voyagers were sent off in August and September of 1977 and are now over 10 billion miles from the Earth. But it will still take them tens of thousands of years before they're anywhere close to anywhere that intelligent alien life could even conceivably be. Though NASA is still blasting stuff into space now and then, interest in attempting to educate aliens by sending them Earthling messages has really petered out in recent decades. From what I can tell, the broad consensus among both astronomers and anthropologists is that none of these initiatives have aged particularly well. You look back at any of these things and they're all painfully bound up in the politics, technology, and broader cultural assumptions of the 1970s, which is bad, not because the 1970s were bad, but simply because they exposed the inherent problems with trying to communicate relevant information about Earth to other parts of the universe when we lack the capacity to do so in any sort of timely manner. Dr. Drake's binary message to the M13 star cluster, for instance, is predicted to take about 25,000 years to get there, and I don't think anyone expects this to be a representative sample of Earth's technological capacities in the 270th century. But you know, on some level, none of this stuff has ever really been about the aliens. It's always been about us. We enjoy the challenge of trying to describe ourselves, as well as the challenge of trying to communicate in non-traditional ways. And of course, we love doing anything that gives us even the smallest taste of immortality. The idea that stuff we're working on now in the present exists not just as meaningless busy work to fill our pointless lives, but substantial achievements destined to be appreciated across the known universe. More than anything else, the existence of these sorts of unfulfilled human desires are probably the most substantial thing any of this stuff has to teach another civilization.